Hello, and welcome back to our series of studies on the great 19th century philosopher Soren Kierkegaard. He was a philosopher in Denmark in the 19th century. He lived between 1813 and 1855. And we started this series of studies at St. Paul's Lutheran Church a couple of years ago. And we got through I think we got to about the seventh chapter. So I decided to continue the series of studies on the internet. Some of the people in the study said a deeper explanation needs to be given on the philosophy of SK. So I thought it would be a perfect setting to continue on YouTube to explain the entire philosophy of SK, because he's not easy. There's a lot of complications, a lot of thought-provoking ideas in all of his thinking. So I think this is study number 23, actually, that we're going to do today. So far, we've gone through the aesthetic sphere, and in the last lesson, we got into the ethical sphere of existence. And once again, as I said in the last lesson, the ethical sphere of existence is a transitional sphere between the aesthetic, or the life of perdition, the road to perdition, and the truly religious, which is religiousness A, or religiousness B, as SK defined it, the truly Christian religion. For SK's pseudonyms, in this case, Judge William Affam, or Affam, however you want to pronounce that, marriage and love, the relationship between a man and woman, is the most revealing aspect of what existence is all about in the ethical sphere. In the religious sphere, of course, there is the relationship to God, but in the romantic or in the ethical sphere of marriage, it is the relationship between a man and a woman. So what we did in our last lesson was we started into the ethical sphere, and in William Affam's writings, both in Either Or Volume 2 and Stages on Life's Way, he tries to explain to the young man who is a hopeful case that he can go on from the road to perdition, a road without meaning, really, without substance, to the higher sphere of the ethical. And to do this, he wishes to impress upon the young man the ethical validity of marriage. Now, SK is a very interesting philosopher because the followers of SK, the people who claim to be existential in their philosophy, were people like, let's say Martin Heidegger. He wrote this book, Being and Time. You had Karl Jaspers, who claimed existentialism. You had Jean-Paul Sartre. They had very big, important titles like Being and Nothingness and Being and Time. All very impressive stuff. Here's poor old SK in his pseudonyms. He had titles like The Philosophical Fragments, or Scraps, you could say actually Scraps, I guess, is the more literal Danish word, and the concluding unscientific postscript to the Philosophical Fragments. Because SK was a philosopher who liked to philosophize about what he really knew, what he really understood, where so many philosophers go off into things that are only speculative, that they don't have any really definite knowledge about. And of course, during SK's time, Hegel was actually the perfect example of a philosopher who thought he understood existence and he understood in his system what the meaning of existence is all about. And he thought he had come up with a system to explain it, as anyone knows who's really studied Hegel. But Kierkegaard, like Socrates, was content with what he really knew, what he really understood. Things like falling in love, a broken engagement, the question of what it means to die. These are the existential issues he loved to philosophize about. So in the ethical sphere, he analyzes something so mundane that Sartre, Heidegger, and Jaspers probably would never attempt. And that is, what's love? What's marriage? And Kierkegaard wrote more about love and marriage than any other topic. He did not neglect the deeper epistemological, phenomenological questions of what being really is and how we relate to being. He deals with those in the postscript, and we've already covered that pretty much in depth and in our prior study, so now we're in the ethical sphere. So let's pick up on page 205. It's based on a book on Soren Kierkegaard. The book is called Soren Kierkegaard, Night of Infinite Resignation. You can buy a copy at Amazon.com, and hopefully you have a copy and you can follow along. So what Judge William first begins to explain to his young man, the young man who becomes his friend, is what love truly is, what true love is, because you only fall in love once in your lifetime. So he wishes to explain this interesting phenomenon of falling in love with another person. In this case, a person of the opposite sex. It's not about falling in love with your male friend. That's a different kind of love. But falling in love with a woman is a sensual love. Now, I love Kierkegaard, but that doesn't mean I'm sexually attracted to Kierkegaard or ever have been. But this regards the love between a man and a woman, which God has ordained and wishes for us to experience in our lives. So the first part of the analysis, both in Either War, Volume 2, and Stages on Life's Way, is what this true love really is. And he characterizes it as a unity of freedom and necessity. In other words, let me quote a little further. It's characterized as a unity of freedom and necessity. So it is in this case precisely in the necessity. The individual feels himself free, is sensible to this of his whole individual energy. Love involves a transfiguration, a spiritualization, which lasts his whole life. In him, there is a union of all the factors which ordinarily are dispersed. He is at the same time both younger and older than men commonly are. He is a man and yet a youth, yea, almost a child. He is strong and yet weak. So we see here how true love between a man and a woman is a transfiguration, a change in one's own existence. And it's characterized by both freedom and necessity. The necessity is the two are meant for each other. The two cannot resist each other, and yet it's done with complete freedom. And this is also a good analysis or a good analogy to what free will is in man. It's necessity, but it's also done freely. It's done willingly. It's not as if the will wills against its will. It wills with complete freedom. And so it is with true love between a man and a woman. In that, as it's many common expressions illustrate this, like they were meant for each other. A marriage made in heaven. This necessity and yet freedom at the same time. And then the consciousness that they were eternally meant for each other. So, first love possesses all the immediate temperamental assurances. It fears no danger. It defies the whole world. And my only wish for it is that it may always have an easy time. But then you bring this first love, this freedom and necessity, into relationship with marriage. And so this is the goal of Judge William. How do you do this and keep the joy, the aesthetic, and the sensuous that's in the aesthetic relationship, in love, first love? How do you preserve that into marriage? Because the aesthetic is ephemeral. The beauty of a woman fades. I've known very beautiful women, and within 5-6 years, they lose that beauty. But that beauty is what aesthetics depends on. So when the beauty fades, what is there then? What is there that will last in the relationship? And that's marriage. That is the God-given blessing that God gives to first love. Without that, no marriage can last or be happy. You might stick together, you may stay together because of children or whatever, but it was not meant to be, and it wasn't blessed by God. So this blessing in marriage, this promise of being together, staying together for the rest of your life, is critical to preserving that first love that you felt for that other person. So what scandalizes the young man, first of all, is the idea in marriage that the man is the Lord and master of the woman in marriage. I know feminists will completely be offended at the idea that they are to be subservient to men, but that is the way God wants it in marriage. If a woman doesn't want that, then maybe she should not go into marriage. But to have a happy marriage, there has to be a leader, and God has given man that role in the family, to lead the family and to be the master, so to speak, of the woman. And that's the way happy marriages are built and happy families are built. Because there has to be a leader in any organization. And the first institution that God ever instituted was marriage. Marriage is the first and foremost organization of human existence. And he put man in charge of marriage, just like he puts man in charge of the church too. There are exceptions where women can get involved in the leadership in the church, but they are exceptions. There are many exceptions in the Bible as to when women were called by God to be in the leadership role. But that's a whole nother subject, and maybe we can get into that in some other study. But as far as marriage is concerned, the man is supposed to be the leader. So woe, he says, to him who awakens any doubt in this relationship between man and woman in the family. Woe to him who awakens doubt in her. and would teach her to revolt against her nature and not be willing to kneel before God. And now this sounds very chauvinistic, and in our time it's not popular, but it is the best way to build a marriage. The other objection that Judge William deals with is that when first love is referred to God, this becomes. Okay, hold on. The final objection that Judge William anticipates in the young man is the thought that a third power wants to impose itself on this happy relationship between man and woman. The third power, of course, is God. Judge William observes that this higher power does not obtrude itself, but rather sets itself and acts as a magnifying force that transfigures first love into a higher sphere. When first love is referred to God, it comes to pass for the fact that the lovers thank God for it. With this, an ennobling transformation is effected. In other words, God blesses that relationship and ennobles it for the long run of existence. In the aesthetic, the beauty runs out. Both man's beauty and woman's beauty is ephemeral. It only lasts a few years, and the money could run out, health could run out. Those things that brought the two people together in purely the aesthetic sphere can easily run out, and there has to be something deeper and better. And this is what the church brings into this relationship. So that when we all get ugly, like me, or women I've known, I mean, I've known some of the most beautiful women in their early 20s and 26, 27, 20, whenever it is. So much of the aesthetic quality in them has faded away. Not that they're not still beautiful. They're beautiful in a different way. So what I'm saying is that the aesthetic fades, the aesthetic goes, and now in marriage you need a higher understanding of the relationship. And this can only come about by God's blessing in marriage, in God's institution. In marriage, for the married couple who seeks God's blessing, it is far more beautiful to receive the beloved from God's hand than to have subdued the whole world in order to make a conquer the woman. It's more beautiful to receive from God what God has wanted you to have all along. A man loves only once in life, because if you could love more than once, what would the institution of marriage be about? It would be meaningless, because you could fall in love many, many times, presumably. But if that were so, if that were possible, then there's no real significance to marriage. Just marry whoever you love that week or that month. So true love comes once. In case people get married who do not love each other, that's not the church's fault. But this is why it is so incredibly important that people who want to get married go through marriage counseling by a really good Christian minister or priest who impresses upon them what they're getting involved with, the importance it is before God, and what this engagement, which is a promise for life, is all about. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of good marriage counseling, pre-counseling before people get married. And then that's why our divorce rate is so high, is because people get married who don't understand the institution. So William Affham goes on in this same spirit. Marriage blesses man by bringing melody into man's eccentric movements. It gives strength and significance to woman's quiet life, but this only insofar as she seeks it in man. And so it does not become an unwomanly manliness. His proud wrath is quelled by the fact that he turns back constantly to her. Her weakness is made strong by the fact she leans upon him. So you see how this unity between man and woman creates a stronger bond, a stronger power, and is really the keystone for a strong family. Man's strengths are enhanced by woman. Woman's strengths are enhanced by man. So it's a two-way relationship in which both can preserve and raise a family. But since this can be achieved without the wedding ceremony, what is the real purpose of the ceremony of marriage? For example, in the Old Testament, you have cases like Isaac and like Jacob, who entered into marriage without any sort of ceremony whatsoever. They went in, see, for example, after Jacob had served Laban 7 years for his daughter, Jacob went into Rachel. And so they were married through a sexual act, coition, and there was no ceremony. So what is the ceremony? What is the purpose of the outward institution of marriage in the church? And here's how William Affham describes it. The actual marriage ceremony and the rules of government in preserving this marriage and protecting it provides a survey of the genesis of the human race, and therewith it grafts the new marriage upon the great body of the race. Thereby it presents the universal, the essentially human, and evokes it in consciousness. Perhaps this offends you, you say. At the very instant when one is uniting oneself to a person so tenderly that everything else disappears from view, it is distasteful to be reminded that it is an old story, marriage and that institution. But the institution is valuable because it preserves a record of what happened. It grafts the relationship into the history of the human race. So when you look back on your ancestors, you see in public documents, in church documents, this person was joined to this person, and therefore it becomes a part of history. It checks the emotion and the motion of love, you say. Not at all, but rather it causes that which was already in motion to appear outwardly. It insists upon the universal human, and in this sense also upon sin, but all the dread and anguish which desires that sin might never have come into the world. Okay, so here I did not read that too well, but what he's getting at here is that sin came into the world through concupiscence, and concupiscence makes sex sinful, but it's through marriage that God sanctifies sex as a legitimate human experience, and therefore that all sex should be conducted in marriage. Anything outside of marriage which is performed as a sexual act is is not ordained, or is not sanctified, is not blessed by God. It's only sex that happens through marriage. Let's see, we've got about, 5 minutes. Okay, well, I think we can get through this. Okay. Um, Thereupon, the church turns to the individual and asks him several questions. Thereby, it may seem that he is prompted to reflect, why such questions? But the church puts the questions not to make one waver, but make one firm, and to let that which already is firm express itself. And the questions are essentially, are you taking this seriously? Do you really know that you love this person? Do you really know that the responsibilities? Hast thou taken counsel with God and with thy conscience, and then with friends and acquaintances? And thereupon the church requires a vow. We saw above how splendidly love can be assumed. Resolution makes the individual free, but as has been explained, the more free the individual, the more aesthetically beautiful is marriage. So in an ironical way, the sexual relationship frees the relationship, in that the sexual relationship, the aesthetic relationship, is let loose, is let free by God in the institution of marriage. It's kind of an ironical twist on the aesthetic understanding versus the ethical understanding of how God sanctifies sexual relationships in marriage, and therefore it's free, and God blesses it. Now, the only reason that Judge William Affam can come up with as to why a man should not ever marry is the one that S.K. himself experienced in his secret sin. For Judge William Affam, there should be no secrets between a man and a woman in marriage. Everything should be upfront, and there should be no secret experience, or no secret that they're unwilling to share with the spouse. And SK can think of only one situation where, if you cannot reveal something to the spouse, you should not get married. And that was his own secret sin. And so many people have comment on SK's life wonder, what is that secret? And some suppose that it was this dalliance with perhaps a prostitute, or it was his own melancholy, which he could never get over until the very last weeks of his life. And we don't know what it was, but for him, it was one of the main reasons that he could not get married. Okay, so this is in essence what William Affam is speaking about in marriage. And actually, this is from Either Or Volume 2. And in the next book, we're going to go on to William Affam's same analysis in Stages on Life's Way. So there we leave Judge William Affam until we meet up with him again in Stages on Life's Way. In Stages on Life's Way, this is a typical Kierkegaard repetition of what he's dealt with in Either Or Volume 2. So we're going to go through again William Affam's deeper understanding. As S.K. grew, as we all do, his understandings of these things became deeper. So he wished to repeat William Affam in a deeper analysis of what we've just been talking about in the ethical sphere. And he goes in deeper into this whole understanding of aesthetic love and marriage, and the beauty of the two. So we'll leave it off until we get back to you later on. Thanks.